Welcome to Film Riot, and if you haven't heard, My Road Reel is back, which if you don't know what My Road Reel is, what have you been doing? It's been going on for 6 years. Every year, it is the biggest short film competition that there is online. And now they're in their 6th year, and this year they're giving away over $1 million in prizes to be won across 28 categories. Of course, anyone can enter. You just download the starter pack and get shooting, and I'm gonna put a link for that starter pack below. But also this year, I'm one of the judges. So with that in mind, I thought I would give some of my tips for making a short film, which of course we're going to start in the most logical place, which is writing. And more often than not, I'm really trying to write what I can pull off. I know what resources we have, what budget we have at our disposal. So before I go into the writing process at all, I'm keeping that in mind. So I'm not writing for a 20-person cast when I know I only have 3 people that I can grab. I'm not writing for this big action piece with explosions and guns when I know I can't get my hands on all that. If all you have is a coffee shop and 2 friends, well then get creative and write something around that. Then while writing, I'm always trying to think in terms of setups and payoffs. And I'm not just talking about, showing the close-up of a gun and then later the hero uses that gun. I do of course do things like that, like in Ballistic, there is the setup of the gun and her not understanding how to use it and the payoff of her ultimately figuring that out, and we get to go along with that journey. So we have a setup and payoff of that kind there, but you also have story setups and payoffs and emotional setup and payoffs, which I tried to pay off the 2 main ones in Ballistic at the exact same time. So we have this setup of this main villain that's coming after our character through most of the piece, and we have this setup of the emotion between the mother and daughter that's evolving over the piece. And then in the end, in this one moment, we get that full emotional payoff when we realize what the mother's been trying to tell her all along, which gives her the strength to carry out the climactic payoff between her and the villain. Moving on to the next writing tip is, if first you want to go left, go right instead, meaning your first instinct is probably something the audience is anticipating, so do the opposite. A good example for this is from my short film Tell. There's a part where the actor bends down to splash some water on his face. When he comes back up, initially I was gonna have something behind him for a jump scare, but I quickly realized that my audience was probably going to see that coming, so instead of doing that, I did the opposite. I did nothing. So instead of having a payoff jump scare there that would deflate tension, I just let that build and hit them later where they wouldn't be expecting it. And for my last writing tip, which is something I always try to do, and that's let theme guide your story. Figure out what your theme is, and that's gonna dictate what comes next and how your characters act.
Just keep moving.
Then we move into gear, which is one of the least important things when it comes to telling a story to your audience, but still important. And if you're lucky enough to have a choice in what kind of gear you're going to use, think about what you want your audience to feel, what you're trying to convey, and pick everything around that. Don't just do a crane shot just because you have access to a crane.
This whole thing is full of lights. I'm gonna shoot it in the air and make our own moon.
If you don't have your choice in resources and your resources are very limited, this is an aspect that you're gonna wanna be thinking about when you're thinking about the story that you want to tell. Keep in mind, if all you have is an iPhone, gear everything around that. I mean, our phones take incredible video now, but they do have a lot of limitations, so keep those in mind when you're crafting your story. Moving into production, the key is preparation. Prepare, then once you think you're prepared, prepare some more. You should know the script forwards and backwards better than anyone else. Do shot lists, do storyboards, animatics if you want to. I've done animatics for things like Ghost House for sequences that really didn't need it, and I never showed my DP. It was just for me to test the pacing and tone to really hone in on what I wanted my audience to experience in that moment. But just because you prepare all of these things, if you storyboard the entire film, shot list the entire film, do all these animatics, that doesn't mean you're gonna stick to it or you even have to. In fact, it's very unlikely that you will. With limited sources like we have, you're never going to really hit that thing that was in your head, but it's going to educate you on all the ideas that you know that you want for the story, so you can come up with alternates very quickly. Instead of creating from nothing, you're just tweaking what you already prepared. Then we have tone. Before you roll a single frame, you need to understand your tone and lock into that completely. Every camera angle, lens choice, lighting choice, your location, wardrobe should all feed into that tone. If you don't, and your tone is jumping around where it shouldn't be, it's going to ruin your film. And if you've ever heard anybody talk talk about confident filmmaking, this is a place that will really land there or not. If your tone is solid throughout and you really sell it, that's gonna feel very confident, and it's gonna give your audience the confidence to just sink into your film. If you're unsure how to strike the tone that you're wanting to strike, go watch a film that has a similar tone and analyze how they pulled it off. Then you have casting, and I don't know who said it, but the majority of directing is casting. Casting really is key. If you cast people who can't go to the depths that you're wanting to go, that's gonna be a major issue for your film. You're not gonna be able to sell the moment, and again, you're gonna lose the confidence of your audience. And this is another part that you need to be thinking about when writing. Think about the people that you know you can get in your film and write to their strengths and weaknesses. A good, for instance, for this is between one of my first short films, Losses, and one of my most recent, Ballistic. Look at the bad guys in Losses. You have people looking like they work at American Eagle with their polo shirts and very young, two guys who look like they actually could kill you. So the intensity is not there in Losses, but it is there in Ballistic because it was casted appropriately.
And that's a wrap on Rachel.
Then you have to commit 100%, you and your cast. If anyone holds back, we're gonna feel it, and that's another thing that loses confidence. For an example of what I mean, the best thing to look at is action. Take my short film, Proximity. At the end of the film, there's this fight scene in the mud, and at first, we had a few takes going and it was looking okay, but eventually my actors looked up at me and asked me if I was getting what I wanted, and I honestly said no. They're giving me 90% and I needed 100. On the next take, they really went to 100%, of course, keeping safety in mind and always staying safe, that being more important than anything else. But they gave me 100%, and that is what ended up in the short film. And if they didn't, it just wouldn't have worked. And I've seen so many short films where even the hero's just supposed to be running, but they're clearly just jogging, and it doesn't work. And of course, this goes across from comedy, drama, and every other genre and scene. If you don't commit 100%, we're gonna know. Then in production, sound, and more sound. I say it all the time on the show, and I'm still shocked at how many short films that I come across where the sound was clearly neglected. If you don't have the right gear to capture really good sound, don't write something that's really dialogue heavy. Again, going back to writing to what you have resources to. If you don't have great audio gear, write something that is very minimal in dialogue or has no dialogue at all. But if you do have the gear, be sure that that dialogue is being captured in the best possible way, in the quietest possible atmosphere, and get as much wild sound, which is sound from on set, as you possibly can to use later. It's the easiest to make feel organic when you're layering up sounds in post. Then the last tip I have for production is to feed your crew, and as well as you possibly can, have snacks on set, have drinks on set. Most of us aren't paying the crew. We're doing this as a passion project, so make sure you're feeding them as well as you can. It's one of the best ways to keep morale up and everybody on your side. But now, before we jump into post-production, we're gonna take a quick break to thank Daddy. Let's say the obvious. We talk about Domain.com a lot. You probably know what I'm about to say. Intuitive website builders, place to go to create your identity online. You can brand yourself. They got 300 domain name extensions from .club to .space. But I'm not, I'm not just a spokesperson. I'm a client. I use it. I really do. I don't know how many domain names I have at this point. I kind of got addicted to it, like gambling, and I just kept buying them, thinking maybe one day I would use it. It's not really gambling. That was a terrible example of what I meant. And I mean, we all know the best domain extensions to tell your story online. .com and .net. I have a lot of them. Anyway, if you want to buy a ridiculous number of domain names, you can use the coupon code FilmRiot at Domain.com's checkout to get 15% off those domain names, web hosting, or email, whatever you want. Just throw all kinds of money at it and get great stuff that you can use to brand yourself online, as previously stated. When you think domain names, think Domain.com.
Logo.
Wasting no time and moving right into post-production. If you were doing post by yourself, a thing that really helped me in the past when I was doing post completely alone is having time to step away from it. After you've been working on it for a while, you really aren't seeing it clearly anymore. So giving it a day or two before going back to it is extremely helpful to see it more clearly, and even more helpful if you bring somebody who hasn't seen it yet. You see it in a whole new way that you don't see when you're on your own. Then there's pacing, which admittedly is one of the hardest things to really get right, but it's also one of the biggest issues that I see in short films that get sent to me. Watching it with someone else is definitely going to help you feel when your short film is short, but something that I've always tried to do is cut, and when I think I've cut enough, cut a little bit more until you can feel that it's too tight, and then you can start letting it breathe a little bit more. Then you have sound, which is all your sound effects and your music, and nowadays there's a lot of things that are really gonna help you out with this. One of the things that I've shown on the show before, which is instrumental for small budget productions, is something called Soundly. We did a whole video on that, so I'm not gonna get into it, but you could replace pretty much your entire production sound just using this. We'll put a link in the notes below for that. Then when it comes to music, the same thing. If you can't produce your own music and you don't know a composer, you can either get licensed music from a litany of places or use something like Filmstro where you can still do custom music, but from music that's already pre-made. Again, links for all of that for you below. Then there's notes. Getting and giving notes is extremely important. If you're working with people and you're the director, you're going to be giving a lot of notes. And if you're the editor or finishing it on your own, it's important to send it to trusted people to get notes. And I always use Frame.io for this. Frame.io is incredible for working in this capacity. Let people go and sit with it and then think on it and then leave notes inside of Frame.io. It's a lot more constructive that way. Or use Google Docs and just slap timecode on your piece so people can leave a timestamp so you know what part they're talking about. Finally, and this goes for all of production, and again goes back to what we were talking about before about don't write what you can't do. If you can't pull it off, don't do it. If you can't pull off visual effects just yet, don't put them in your film. Keep practicing or until you find someone who can do it for you. When you put in things that are half done and don't really get all the way there, you are disservicing the entire production. So if you can't pull off a spaceship, don't put it in your short film. If you need an explosion in your film and you can't show it, use sound. You can always cut to the actors, throw some light on them, use sound, and you have your explosion. Don't try to do more than you can actually pull off thinking that it's going to add value to your film. It's only going to reduce the value of your film and kill that confidence from your audience. So that's it. A bunch of things that helped me personally get better over the past 15 years of doing this professionally. So jump into the notes below, check out my road reel, and get involved now while you have plenty of time, because when it comes to filmmaking, time really is the most valuable resource. So don't wait, go jump on it.